Alright everyone, welcome back to another video. Last time I left off with fresh winds from the western front forests. Jeez almighty. I'm thinking too much World War II here. World War II and World War I. But now we're on to Jacksonian democracy. John Quincy Adams was an honest and intelligent man as ever. Oh, I don't know why it doesn't want to focus there on Mr. Jackson. Went to the White House. As intelligent a man as ever went to the White House. He was the only president who may have become greater after his presidency, becoming the chief spokesman for the anti-slavery element in the House of Representatives. But he lacked the art of making himself popular, which Andrew Jackson possessed in abundance. So, after a single term, he went down before Jackson as his father had before Jefferson. Andrew Jackson was typical of the West. He was born somewhere near the boundary between North and South Carolina, but his entire active career was in his adopted state of Tennessee. He had dignity, courtesy, and a fine reverence for women. But he fought duels, chased Indians into Florida, and hanged deserters and British agents who aided the Indians. All previous presidents had been either from Virginia or Massachusetts, and men of education, if not wealthy, at least in easy circumstances. Jackson's victory at New Orleans in the War of 1812 had made him a national hero. Elected president in 1824, he had an inauguration the following March that was a riotous scene of popular rejoicing. Conservative men were dismayed. Jefferson's opinions were bad enough, but the man himself, it says Jefferson's, but the man himself was a scholar and a gentleman, even a philosopher. In no age or country is a scholar a common man. He was for the people, but not of them. Everybody, however, could identify with Jackson. One sour Easterner commenter, Philip Hone, said, "President Jackson is certainly the most popular man we have ever known. Washington was not so much so. Here is a man who suits them exactly. He has a kind of expression for each. The same walk for all, no doubt, but each thinks it intended for himself. Talk of him as the second Washington. It won't do now. Washington was only the first Jackson." For all his immense popularity, Jackson had too impetuous a temper not to make enemies. A technical irregularity in his marriage to a divorced woman had caused political foes to brand him as an adulterer. When superfluous politicians snubbed Peggy Eaton, the former tavern girl who was the wife of one of the members of his cabinet, he championed her cause. Although he disliked Henry Clay and disapproved of his high tariff, when John C. Calhoun of South Carolina threatened to nullify the tariff as unconstitutional, Jackson felt that his own authority had been flouted and declared, "The federal union, it must be preserved." Calhoun left the vice presidency, and Jackson replaced him with Martin Van Buren of New York, his eventual successor in the presidency. Jackson also disapproved of a national bank, and he was the first president to make extensive removals from office on partisan grounds. Senator Marcy declared, "To the victor belong the spoils of the vanquished," and the whole system of partisan appointments became known as the spoils system. The opposition to Jackson crystallized into the new Whig Party, which took its name from the Liberals of England. It had the faults of most opposition parties, a lack of unity on any one basis, and the additional fault of repeatedly running military men with no political record for president. But it contained two giants, although neither quite reached uh, the coveted presidency. Daniel Webster of Massachusetts, the greatest of American orators, and Henry Clay of Kentucky, a deft politician and an ingenious compromiser. Great as was Jackson's personal influence, he was more the leader of the new democracy than its creator. Without him, of some other Western man, Clay perhaps, would have come to the presidency. The new movement showed its strength in various ways. One was universal men's suffrage, without the former property qualifications. Another was the multiplication of elective offices on the state and local level. This did not affect the federal government. Voters had only the choice of presidential electors and of congressmen, since senators were still chosen by the state legislature. But state governors found that their assistants were chosen not by themselves, but by the voters, and many town and county officers were also elected. This worked fairly well in a rural America, where everyone knew his neighbors and could make a fair guess as to who would be the best sheriff, judge, school superintendent, and road commissioner. But when America became cityfied, it presented the voter with a long ballot of unfamiliar names, and in desperation he might vote the straight party ticket. Finally, and not least important, was the new system of party nomination. The Congressional Party caucus had ceased to function, and a substitute was found in a party convention of members of the same party, chosen either directly or indirectly. Since Jackson's time, all parties, great and small, have nominated candidates for president and vice president in party conventions. The result has been to choose less regularly from the cabinet and Congress, and more commonly to pick state governors or eminent generals. The Whigs resembled the old Federalists in championing a national bank, a high protective tariff, and internal improvements at federal expense. But they differed in one respect. The Federalists had been avowedly aristocratic. The Whigs courted popular favor by method quite as oh my gosh, demagogic. I'm pretty sure that's how it's pronounced. As those of the Democrats. This was exemplified in the campaign of 1840. The Whigs nominated William Henry Harrison of Ohio, a former Indian fighter who had won the Battle of uh, Tippecanoe. Answering a Democratic taunt, the Whigs boasted that Harrison was a simple pioneer who lived in a log cabin and drank hard cider. Actually, he was a descendant of Virginia gentlemen. The owner of a good frame house, a man of scholarly and somewhat pedantic speech. For vice president, they chose John Tyler, an anti-Jackson states' rights Democrat, and rode to victory on the cry, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. But elderly General Harrison died almost immediately, and the Whigs were saddled with Tyler too, for almost the whole term. When Tyler came out against the National Bank, the cabinet resigned, with the exception of Webster, the Secretary of State, who wanted to complete negotiations with Great Britain on the Maine boundary. This was the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. You know, I'm going to be honest, I'm a little surprised here. They didn't mention one of Jackson's greatest blunders and blotches on his whole record, which is the Trail of Tears. Jackson, like I said, he was very popular. He could get away with basically anything. We probably haven't had a president like him since. Um, Obviously they made the joke that people back then, oh, that Washington was just the first Jackson. But realistically, Jackson was the second like Washington. People really loved Andrew Jackson, so he got away with a lot of things most presidents could not and would not ever again get away with. The Trail of Tears being one of them, where they march a bunch of Indian tribes out west, um, with the army basically following right behind them, basically forcing out west. Um, Awful, awful. Um, but Jackson is kind of the guy behind that. Tells the Supreme Courts deny his right to do this, and he said, "Well, the courts made their ruling. Let's see if they can uphold it." Crazy. But yeah, Jackson was very, very much loved, and he was very much a common man in many ways. Um, Whenever you hear a lot about his temper and like certain things about him, you realize, yeah, like he's just really a typical guy in some ways. And that's why a lot of people could get around him. He's very unique in the presidency in that he is very typical. He's very anyone can see themselves in Jackson in some ways. Um, a lot of presidents weren't like that, and most aren't actually. Most will never be like that. It's just not possible. A lot of them come from families of either great wealth or great lineage. Jackson, I mean, he kind of did, but not really. He made it himself. But now let's get into the photos. At the top here, oh, if it wants to focus on him, there we go, is John Quincy Adams, the sixth president of the United States. This is a weird picture of Adams because a lot of people would see him where he's a little bit more balded on the top. This is a younger picture of him. And you can really see if it wants to focus. It doesn't not want to focus. It's a trick of the light, I guess. Okay, well, it's not going to focus now. There we go. As you can kind of see, he looks a lot like his father in this earlier picture. It's kind of interesting. At the left here, on his way to his inauguration in Washington, D.C., Andrew Jackson stopped his coach to make impromptu speeches to village people. There's another thing. Jackson knew how to work the people. Okay, he knew what they wanted to hear, what they liked. And look at him. He's very dapperly dressed, things like that. But he's still, think about it, he's still willing to stop and talk to them. That's a big deal. A lot of people would find that very, very nice. Above is a picture of Andrew Jackson, the seventh president of the United States. Obviously, Jackson is on currency today. He is on the $20 bill, I believe. Wild looking guy, but hey, quite popular for the time. At the top here is John Tyler, the 10th president of the United States. Opposite left below here is William Henry Harrison. William Henry Harrison was the 9th president, although his political views were neither extreme nor deeply held. One would not have known that by looking at his poster advertising a meeting in Alton, Illinois. Note also the inference that he had grown up in a log cabin. So you can see there's a log cabin. Public meeting, a general meeting of the Friends of Harrison and Reform. City of Alton, this evening 9th, 7 o'clock in mid-range. But you can see there's a log cabin. It looks like he's all this, but he wasn't that. Frame house, all these things. And lying about it, like it's so dumb. If people find out, they're gonna be really upset. But I mean, I guess it didn't really matter. Uh, John Tyler becomes president, right after him. Harrison didn't live that long, really. Below, Harrison rose to fame as a general in the War of 1812, after which he was both a congressman and senator from Ohio. Yeah, one of the Ohio presidents. Obviously didn't last very long, but Ohio and Virginia are the neck and neck for who has more presidents. Um, there's one president that both of us claim, but yeah, but yeah, pretty important. Uh, Little victory there, mostly because we get John Tyler. But at the right here is the Hard Cider and Log Cabin Almanac from 1841. It had been said that Harrison was a log cabin hard cider candidate. So there you go. Hurrah for old Tippecanoe. And see, like, look, okay, they had some great like advertisements for candidates back then. You know, Tippecanoe and Tyler too. Like, what a great advertisement for a candidate. Just saying. It really rolls off the tongue there. But that's gonna do it for this video. If you guys liked the video, leave a like. If you have anyone who's like to improve these videos, leave a comment down below. I just appreciate your feedback. And as always, subscribe. It really does help out the channel. Thank you.